Hi, welcome to the Reboot Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Reboot Loading Podcast. I am so honored to be in the presence of a repeat guest on the show. This is the first time I've had a repeat guest, so I'm very excited. This is Beth Carter. You know her from her previous podcast. We talked about her dropping the mic in her corporate world job and starting her own business, running dialogue. I have asked her to come back today to talk with me about some skills that would make a good manager. So she has some skills from her expertise side, and I have some that I have written down that I feel like would make a good manager. So I want to see, if they match up or if I'm even close. I would like to welcome back Beth to the Reboot Loading Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be back. I had so much fun with you the first time. And I have to tell you, I'm utterly thrilled and terrified by this question at the same time. So, what are the top 5 skills that make a great manager?
That's a loaded question, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. So, I spent a long time sort of cataloging things that are really important for managers, particularly first-time managers, right?
Mhm.
And it's taking the form potentially of a book someday, we'll see. But I've been working on thinking about what are those skills and what's so important. And so, I sat down with my pen and paper and prepared, and I looked at my notes. It took some thinking, and it took some really serious prioritization. And then it didn't, right? Because I like to say rule number one of management is that it's all rule number one.
Mhm.
So when you think about that, when you think about all of the critical pieces of management, the behaviors, the actions, the skills, they're all almost equally important across the board, which is so almost confounding, right? Because it should be easy to prioritize these things, except that you're dealing with people and situations and change. And so it's very fluid. The first one I'm going to throw out there, which I think is beyond critical, is as a manager, one of the most important skills you have is developing others.
Mhm.
And I say this sometimes is get your eagles out of the nest. So sometimes you have top performers and they're absolutely incredible and they're great in the role they're in, but they often want stretch assignments where they need new capabilities, new skills, even inside a role they're in. And so you have these A players who don't necessarily want to move up in position or management or even cross out of the discipline they're in. Like sometimes you have, I'm going to say, wildly skilled engineers
Mhm.
and you don't necessarily want them all to run away into management. And some of them really very much love the engineering work. They want to be doing the calculations, but you need some chief engineers. You need mentor engineers. And so, what do you do to develop those folks into those very senior level positions that they feel fulfilled and they feel confident and valued? And then you have people who do want to move up to the next level. And maybe they're your star performer and they carry a huge load on your team and you really don't want to lose them.
Mhm.
You still have to get them out of your nest and you have to do it faster because they have so much potential and they're going to drive your organization to greatness and you're holding them back. The longer they work for you, the longer they aren't contributing to their full potential. And so your job also, and this is one of the hardest things as a manager, I think until you get used to it, is that if you do this right, you're going to look at every one of your people and see your best employee. But what you want to do is find their strength and their skill and develop it so that they can go flying out of the nest.
Mhm.
They're needed elsewhere, and it's your job to get them out of that nest. It's your job to build their confidence so that they feel comfortable and ready to apply for that next role. And sometimes it's your job to give them that little shove and say, okay, you're far better at this than I ever was, and I need you to do this.
Mhm.
But you also have to be so not threatened by their skills and their intelligence and their ability that you can augment it and respect it and get them to see it in themselves.
Mhm. I,
All
I,
right, what's your number 5?
well, I will tell you that is on my list. I actually had it as number two.
Excellent.
So My number two, well, same thing as to what you said, but mine is coaching or mentoring.
Hmm.
Because from the non-people manager perspective, where I'm coming from is I have struggled throughout many, many decades of having a manager that actually could provide proper mentoring or proper coaching. So if I come across a manager that I see has that quality, they're usually like on the top of my list where I'm like, that is what I aspire to be. Whether or not I want to be a people manager, just even being able to have that from the aspect of like a team lead
Hmm.
perspective, or even just being a good team person, team player. I didn't want to say
Yeah.
team player because it's so overused, but
Yeah.
just being a good person on your team to be able to pull people together, to be able to maybe even assist in the management piece from the perspective of you can just provide good feedback to help the team go into
Mhm.
the right direction. But in order for you to do that, the manager has to already be open and willing to be able to accept the coaching and mentoring from you. But I feel like a good coach slash mentor in a manager would be. So that
Absolutely.
was my take on that. So it did match your list, but I had it as number two.
Absolutely. Well, and I think too is, I can't say this enough, but coaching is so collaborative, right? And so there's a willingness on the part of the person receiving to also be coached. And when you are a coach, it's incumbent on you to listen to what that feedback is from the person performing and from others around you who are saying, maybe you're not resonating with that person or you're not getting the results you think you are. And so there's this openness to feedback even though you know it's going to come from a place or drive you to a place of discomfort, it will eventually help you get better. And
Mhm.
so I think to me, there's this unfailing belief that people are capable. You can find as their manager their capabilities and maximize them and give them the confidence to keep moving. And that's a hard job sometimes, but it is so important.
I agree.
Getting your eagles out of the nest, as I like to say, developing your people, this is so intrinsically tied to, I can't call it number four. I'm just going to call it the next one, the one next to it on the list, because they're equal. I think they're equally important, right? Every employee is your best employee. And I tipped my hand a little bit before saying, look, we approach our teams from this open-hearted place that says, I have a fundamental belief in someone's success and ability to grow. And so every person on your team is the best person on your team. You rarely in the corporate world get to go, Red Rover, I want Peter to come over, whatever, right? You don't get to do that, particularly when you're slotted into a management role. You land with a team and it's inherited. And it drives me batty when I hear managers say, well, it's just a team I inherited. And I thought, yeah. And it's your responsibility to discover the greatness inside each person. And how much of a fool are you to overlook someone just because of something you heard? Go discover how great they are for themselves. And you have to believe that every person on your team is the best person on your team at something. They're not all the best at the same thing, but they fit together for a reason. Drive their skills and their capabilities in a way that lights them up and you'll see results like you never have before. But again, you have to go all the way back to that unfailing belief that every employee is your best employee and every employee wants to be developed and continue to grow.
Oh, that one just gave me chills because going into a management position, and I personally have seen this a lot with managers who kind of made the ranks more based on tenure
Mhm.
versus skill.
Oh, for sure.
So it gets lost in that piece to where
Oh,
if they are in that mindset of, I've worked with this person on, as a peer, and now all of a sudden they're a manager, they're already going to have these biases and that sort of thing. Every employee is your best employee. That was one that I had not thought of, and I love it.
yeah. This one, I'm gonna say I'll tell you a great story. So in the mic drop moment that we talked about the last time, so I came home and said to myself, I'm done. I'm finished.
Mm-hmm.
I'm out. And the only thing that kept me up that night wasn't the job, it wasn't the pay or the benefits. The only thing that I was awake thinking about was what was the gift I wanted to give to each one of my employees when I left that would be most meaningful and special to them. And it was a book. I gave everyone a book, but everyone had a different book, and it was very different for them for each reason about where they were going, what I knew they needed to hear right now. And so I'm telling you, I was laying awake thinking about this. And of course, I grabbed my phone and I figured the last one out and I fell right asleep. And I knew I had made the right decision.
You are literally a gem because I don't think I personally have never had a manager like you. You are the manager that I've always wanted. That right there, that takes a huge bit of empathy, right? And
Mhm.
that kind of ties into which is pretty much on the top of my list,
Go.
which is emotional intelligence. So, and this one I know can be tricky as far as like being a
Mhm.
skill, but being able to have certain amounts of empathy and understanding within your team and like how you catered your gift that you were going to give to your employees based on who they are or who, you've gotten to know them to be, that is just, I don't even know the words for it. It's just amazing. I mean, that takes such a huge amount of that emotional intelligence, I feel.
And I can't take full credit without some help, right? It's unfair for me to present myself as this fully formed gem, right? Is I had some amazing mentors myself, people who believed in me so firmly, but they did for everyone, and I could see it in how they treated us all. And so I think I had the opportunity to learn from greatness and to understand that is what good looks like and that is what practice takes. And I certainly wasn't always there, but I've grown over the years to find ways to bring meaning to those relationships and to bring meaning into it. And I think it's perfect for me to bump to, I will say this one I think is actually my number one. And so we'll compare number ones real quick.
Okay.
You actually have to fucking care.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is you have to be authentic and adaptable and consistent. And those things are all practices, they're all choices, but you have to care enough to make that choice. And
That's
so to me, that's you actually have to fucking care.
Mhm. And that's very powerful. And I don't think there's a better way to say it because it's so truthful. And
Yes.
me on the flip side, I've seen so many times where, I get it. I understand from the management perspective, especially in middle management, you really are a middleman. However, you have to be up for the challenge and you do have to have a certain level of caringness. Now, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on the care part.
Oh,
So
for sure.
let's give some examples of like, what does that look like in the workplace?
For sure. And sometimes that's really basic stuff. Like your priority is my priority. The thing that's getting in your way from being effective at your job, I also care enough about to make your day better and easier. So I also care when you show up at work sick. As I had a team for a long time, we had this rule. So this is long before the pandemic. I
Mhm.
think 10 years before the pandemic. We jokingly had this rule that we said together. I used to say, there's no B and no D, and I'm fine. So if you show up at work and you go, I'm fine, I'm gonna send you home. So
Mhm.
there's pieces like that. There's caring about folks' emotional well-being. And this is one where, as a Gen Xer, I grew up with this, like, you never cry at work. You don't show your emotions at work. We don't do that. Yeah, you do. Yeah,
Mhm.
you do. We're whole people. We're whole human people. That's how it works. And you can be a very caring and empathetic manager and leader without being in somebody's business.
Mhm.
You can catch somebody and say, hey, are you doing okay? I noticed your behavior's a little outside of the norm. Is there anything you need? and let them say, I'm fine. Great. You let me know. I'm here if there's any resource I can provide for you. And you get out of the way. You can also, if they want to tell you things, you can say, pause. This sounds like really personal information. Do you want to just vent and let me know what you need?
Mm-hmm.
So you can set those boundaries too with saying, I hear you. Do you need me to do anything for you? Do you need me to listen? Let's make sure we consider this confidential. So there's this opportunity to protect people's well-being and to think about them as whole human beings. So it's not just, it's not all hearts and rainbows. It's also protecting them for liabilities and for their development. And it's things like, hey, I care enough about you to know that this form that we have to have filled out by the 15th is not done. And if it isn't done, you end up on the president's bad list, and that's going to impact how he views you as a high potential. I care enough about you and how you're seen. I'm going to protect you from the silliness that's going to happen when you're not in the room and I'm not in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot to it again. And it's all choices, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
adaptability, it's consistency, it's authenticity, and it's all those things wrapped into one. And authenticity for me is tricky, right? Because authenticity is, to me, it's this willingness to say the hard thing and to consistently act in a same way and an equitable way and be fair and reasonable and all those things and to show up. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, there's days when I think to myself, man, I don't want to do this right now. And authentically, I would rather lay on the couch, but I'm not. I am going to give you everything I can bring, but I'm also going to level with you and say, hey, I'm having a really tough day. I need a little quiet space. And that's authenticity the way I look at it. Or
Mm-hmm.
you let your people have that same thing as having a rough one. Don't want to talk today. Great. You need a private room? What can we do?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that kind of thing, right? And all of that goes back to caring.
Through all of those examples right there, I came up with two of my own management experiences. So
Tell me
I've
more.
I have one really good one and then one that was just kind of half-assed. So way back when, years and years and years ago when I was kind of first starting out in my corporate life and just really getting into things, I had gotten into a bad car accident my very first day on the job. So I
Oh,
left for lunch and never came back. Well, I did come back eventually, but yeah, I left for lunch and then, it was a pretty bad trauma crash. So it did leave me with being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So, of course, I just started this job. I was my first day, like, how do you explain this to your boss?
hmm
But, I was having a lot of just physical issues, and my boss was amazing in just being very accommodating with me going to appointments, or sometimes there were just some days where I just could not be sitting in the office. Like I would just be in so much pain, and he would just be like, go ahead and go home and just take some rest. Good 6 months went by. And at that point, it was really starting to hit me. And I was having a lot of struggles just more mentally. And there was just one day I woke up and I was like, I cannot drive. I cannot go to work. I was in tears. And the first thing I did was I called my boss and I was just like, can we come in and talk to you? So of course, I had to have my husband drive me there. Sat down with him and kind of explained, hey, this is what's going on. And this was the absolute first time I think in my life I had gotten this amazing human being in front of me who said, let's figure this out. This was way before, anybody would work from home or
hmm
there was no remote jobs. Like it was very few and far between. So he was like, let me set you up with a computer at home. Let's let you do this if you're feeling up to it. And I was like, thank you very much. And sure enough, I never had to take time off, thankfully, even though I went through some tough times. But because of the fact that he was willing to work with me, work with his manager, and explain the situation and understand, how tough it was, I was actually able to keep my mind occupied and keep feeling like, I was a good person and I was accomplishing something by still being able to work, having some dignity there. And, he allowed me to do that. So shout out to my former manager sung for being the still to this date the best manager ever, my life probably would have went in a totally different direction. So there's my good example.
That's awesome.
Yes, 100%. And on the flip side, one manager that stuck out to me, and this was the kind of half-assed approach to, actually fucking caring, which is I would be in certain focus groups looking at employee engagement, talking to other employees, trying to put together like a presentation or something to management to say, hey, these are the issues. This is, what people are saying based off of our surveys and that sort of thing. So this was something, I would be tasked with. And based off of the information that I would get from there, I would provide my feedback and say, hey, this is where things are broken. This is where, this is what I'm struggling with trying to get things done, or this is what I'm hearing a lot from other people that we're struggling with. And the answer I would always get, or the response I would always get, I should say, is, I get it. And I'm like, thanks, I'm glad that you get it. Now what?
This is the part where you get it and do something about it.
Right. That's why I said it was more of like that half-assed caring. And it was like we were just getting there, like, oh yeah, you get it. Okay, you're acknowledging my pain, you're acknowledging other people's issues, you're acknowledging it. I love the acknowledgement. So where's the action?
I have two more. What do you have?
Oh, I had, so one of mine was, and this kind of goes with a little bit of your pushing out of the nest piece, but
Yeah.
delegation. So
Mm,
delegation was actually number 3 on my list.
okay.
And I put that as number 3 because I have had experiences in the past where I've dealt with a lot of micromanagers,
Mhm.
and micromanagers cannot delegate because they don't know how to. Like that's part of what
Nope.
makes them a micromanager. And not allowing us to go out and push us out of our nest, like you say, like they're like,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. I have to approve everything before you do it. I have to do this and that. And there's absolutely no growth in that. Like as an
Mm-mm.
employee, I cannot grow from just being shielded all the time. I also cannot grow from you having to, look at all the work that I'm doing first. I have to learn from mistakes, and that's how we are going to grow and learn. You have to allow me to make some mistakes. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm gonna give you my middle one,
Okay.
which is this is do the administrative bullshit, period. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to tell you a great story. So I knew this guy when I took my first supervisory role. His name was Rick Matthews. He was a manager in the plant I was in, and I did not report to him, but he heard that I took the supervisory role and he caught me in the hall one day and he said, "Okay, here's the thing. You never fool around with people's money. You never fool around with their time off, and you do what you said. You got it? Cool, great, okay, see you around." And off he went, and I was like, Hold on." You know? And so that's evolved in the last 20 something years. It's evolved a little bit. This is what I say is you never fool around with people's money. You never fool around with their time off. You never fool around with their IT access because that in the last few years, all those accesses that you need, all of the authorizations and licensing and all that stuff, but you never fool around with that stuff. And then you do what we said. Because who wants to be sitting around waiting, wondering if your vacation is approved? I always tell people, here's the thing. I'm unlikely to read the date that you asked for vacation. I'm going to hit approve.
Mhm.
And then if everyone asked for the same dates, we'll find it on our shared calendar later and talk about what we're going to do then. But by and large, I'm going to hit approve before I see anything. And around big holidays, I'm going to have a conversation with you of what should we do as a team. Give them the time off.
Mhm.
Figure it out later. If somebody's pay is messed up, how angry are you if your paycheck is wrong? Go fix it. And
Mhm.
I'm talking about like you can finish that email later. Stop what you're doing and go fix their pay. The vacation one, I'm on the finish the email maybe and then go right into that next. Their IT access gets revoked, a license failed. You finish what you're doing and you go after IT as fast as you can. And you do what we said. You tell them, hey, I'm going to go talk to IT now. Hey, I went and talked to IT and it turns out their budget's gone. So we have to figure out a workaround. And so it's really this trick of how do you make sure those tactical things that people think of as like dumb management stuff, that's critical to somebody else.
I thought about when you're a new hire coming on board. Of course, you have a lot of the HR pieces that you have to do and that sort of thing, but then you go into, I don't know if it would be considered like a training mode or kind of just a
Mhm.
little bit of a, okay, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's all the tools that you have. Being shown those sort of things. I've been in so many positions where it was just like, here you go. And then you're looking, and a lot of times what ends up happening with me is I'm going, did I miss something? Like, should I know these things? And over the years, it gave me so much of this self-doubt because I thought I'm just supposed to know, how to get access to certain things or how to, or which tools we use for what sort of thing, right?
Mhm.
And what I found in just my experience is it came from a lot of managers that they have been in the position for just so long that they forgot what it's like to be the new person coming in.
Mhm.
I know I can do the job. It's just the job is different everywhere. So
Yeah.
every place has a different set of norms and that sort of thing. And I feel like it's the manager's job to do that piece. And I feel like
Yes.
that does fall under the administrative bucket of making sure you have the tools that you need to actually do the job that you were hired to do.
All
Uh,
right, last one. What do you have?
so I have, I mean, this is kind of, I feel like a no-brainer, but the ability to do conflict resolution.
Mm.
And of course,
Mm.
these are all coming from like my own experiences. So, but I feel like there have been so many times just in my career where, let's say, maybe I'm working across teams or whatever, and there might be certain personalities that we just don't click.
Yep.
And I'm the type of person where I will try to do whatever I can to smooth that over. But then when it gets to a point where you're just dealing with a real, asshole, for lack of
Hmm.
any better word, you got to go to management and say, hey, I've tried. And especially when it's a scenario where you are not able to get your work done because it's reliant on maybe some things that they're doing.
Yep.
And you go to management and you're like, hey, I need a little help here. And this is what I've tried, this is what I've done. And the answer that I would get, and this has happened to me more
Oh.
times than I think I can count, is, oh, well, they're just like that. And I get that they're just like that, but what are we going to do about it? More times than not, I've been the person that's had to just kind of schmooze things over to be able to get my work done. There's never been any ramifications on the other side or even any sort of inklings or beginnings of conflict resolution.
Pains me to hear you say that, Stephanie. But I also know it's incredibly true as we're living in a time when people are less comfortable saying something directly. And I will say this, one of the things that I saw fall apart in the last 5 or 10 years is people started confusing directness and rudeness. So instead of saying very clearly anything, pick something, that joke doesn't fit well with our team norms, and I'm
Mm.
going to ask you not to say it again. People have said that joke's wrong and you're rude. And like, I'm just being direct. Like, no, no, that was rude. Your tone and your word choice were rude. You could have approached someone in a really different way and gotten the point across, and you didn't sugarcoat it. Maybe use 3 or 4 extra words, but you still got there and you got there in a really effective way. I get super mad when I hear about that because conflict's natural. It happens.
Mhm.
Tension occurs in every single workplace. And again, the unfailing belief that maybe we're all coming from the same place to the same end goal. If we
Mhm.
start there and say, I'm going to make this positive assumption that we both want this project to be successful, we both want it to be on time and on budget, but our problem is we see really different ways of getting it there.
Mhm.
So how can we figure out in between how to make this successful when we both get what we want? It's this negotiating expectation in my mind that we're living in that space. And it's funny because the last one I have is you are now the complaints department. And that's part of it. Conflict is complaint, right? So as a manager, people are going to come to you and say, I hate this software. And you're going to say, I hear you, it's awful. And actually, the next revision isn't for 3 years, so we're stuck with this. Here's what we have to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes somebody comes to you and says, this process doesn't make any sense. And you go, really? Tell me more. And people come to you with complaints all the time, but they also come to you with conflict. And they'll say, this person came in and tried to crash my schedule and then wanted to talk to the customer about it. And they're not supposed to be the point of contact to the customer. And you pause and say, great, let me see if I can have a conversation with that person and let's get on the same page. And then we're going to clearly define roles and responsibilities. And then we're going to come back and we're agree to it. And then we're going to move forward. And then we're also going to get really clear and have those tough conversations with one another when we need to.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the complaints department is also the resolutions department. But I think it's also, you're the first point of contact to change for people. So even if it's silly little things, it used to be the printers out of paper, right? I can't think of something off the top of my head, but it could be seemingly irrelevant things that you need to solve. And those are things that you have to look at and say, okay, where does this fit in our priority list? I hear you. I can do something about this. I can't do something about this. And be really, really clear with people. I mean, people come to you all the time and say, I hate Workday. And my response is, everyone hates Workday.
You're not wrong there.
Right? Are we venting or are we solving?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people will be like, oh, yeah, we really can't do anything. Can we just vent? Yeah, go ahead.
And that can work wonders.
Oh,
Let's be real about it. Just having a nice vent session is sometimes all that's needed. So my last one kind of ties everything together, and I feel like at least, but it's organization. So,
oh.
and this is why I say I feel like it ties into a lot of things that we've talked about, because administrative piece, being able to delegate, being able to
Mhm.
coach, being able to look at your employees as all being, the best of the best, actually caring. Like, I feel like it all can tie to having some organization, because you have to be on top of things, not only, your own work. Like, there's a lot of managers who have, like, their own projects or their own things that they have to work on top of people managing, but how can they organize better to be able to run their team like a well-oiled machine?
Mhm.
And I've just had so many experiences where, we'll use a lot of softwares and tools and different things that help you keep organized, help keep tasks on top of things and whatever. They can't replace, though, the human piece of just being able to keep things organized. And when I say organization,
Mhm.
I'm not just talking about like paper organization. I'm talking about also just the team organization, keeping the team well organized, being able to organize it in a way that you're able to create more leaders on your team, to be able to
Mhm.
delegate more things out, to be able to have more time to care. So being more organized, it structures
Mhm.
out everything, and it allows you to do so.
I don't know. I think I'm with you. I think I've assumed organization and being organized in all of these practices. I've assumed it as sort of a characteristic for folks because when I think about all of these things, you have to have in your head a mental map for each of your employees. And you also have to be playing the long chess game of this person needs to move here and this one's going to go here. And then I have these two holes and I'm going to try to pull this person or grab that one, or I'll need to hire from outside. So you're constantly peeking around corners. You're thinking about what's the next growth project I can assign to somebody. You're thinking about what are all the administrative tasks in our way? What are the things that are going to be roadblocks up ahead? You're constantly looking at the like bigger picture, smaller picture.
One thing that I've learned from this conversation is how different, but also still a little similar, our lists were. Because you're
Mhm.
coming from a viewpoint of you've had amazing mentors in the past, you've had managers that have helped you become who you are, and you are now helping other managers become the best of the best. Whereas on my side, I have been going, where are these managers? Do they exist? But it's interesting to see like the two sides of it, to
Mhm.
where a lot of the things that maybe you think are it should be self-explanatory. I also think that in a lot of the
Implied assumptions.
yes, those implied assumptions are real. One thing I wanted to point out though is in my career and in all the years and all the managers that I've worked with, what I've always seen is that there has to be something coming from the top down to be able to help these managers.
Yeah.
And a lot of these lack in skills and a lot of these, I would say, gaps that they come more from the fact that a lot of the managements are being pushed to just get things done and get work done. And we're always pushing to, month ends and peak times. And it doesn't feel like there's a good return on investment of taking the time up front to really figure things out and really make things better. It's just a lot easier to just kind of throw it out there and be like, well, let's see what happens. But I can tell you firsthand that that is not the way to do it. You're really putting so much more stress in the workplace,
Oh,
there's so much more time and effort, and really in the long run, money being spent on not doing things properly and not having proper training and
for
resources in
sure.
place.
So there's this great old story about a frog and a scorpion, and they meet at the side of a creek. And the frog can swim across and the scorpion can't. And the frog basically says, I can take you across as long as you won't sting me. And the scorpion says, of course I won't sting you. They get all the way across, and then the scorpion stings the frog. It's kind of this weird, dark story. I'd have to pull it up and give you the exact context. But the whole point of that to say is sometimes in management roles, one of the hardest things to do is to be the scorpion, because everybody is someone else's scorpion, whether you meant to be or not. And so I remind myself occasionally, for all the good things I have done, there have been times where I executed very hard things and I was someone's scorpion. And it doesn't mean I wanted to be, but that's who I had to be. And those are hard days to remember too, because you have to look in the mirror and say, for all the things I've done well, I did some things poorly, or I was in an organization, a position where I had to do something that was really hard and really, really awful. And so I was someone's scorpion too.
Could probably add accountability now to that list
Oh,
of
yeah.
good managers because that
Yes.
takes a lot of accountability and guts to admit to those sort of things. So,
Oh, and it hurts to look in the mirror and say, for all the things I've done right, I know I left people hurting,
mhm.
and I don't feel good about that, and I never will. And it's things that you eventually, I'll say you can forgive yourself for, but you also know there's a person there, and you still have this lingering empathy of that's not the way I would have done it if I had been in control to decide.
With everything that we've talked about, I would be remiss in not mentioning that I know that management is hard.
Oof.
I know that it is a tough job. And by no means is the intention to be like, all managers are horrible and, you guys all need to fix yourselves. No, it's just saying, hey, you know what? There are tools and resources out there, number one, that can help you be better at the
For
job that you're
sure.
doing. My number one choice is running dialogue with Beth Carter. There's so many things that organizations can do to help better their teams. My wish for the corporate world, if you are managing people, is to just make sure you're doing it in a way that's conducive to their growth and that, you're a better person for
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
But Beth, I have enjoyed this conversation. I have really just loved getting your perspective on the skills that we, put together that make a good manager. Definitely, it's not limited to those 5 skills, guys. There's a lot of skills out there, but I really appreciate you putting in the time and thinking about this and thinking it through and talking with me about it. I will definitely, as always, have all of your contact information in my show notes. And there are people out there listening. If you have a manager right now that you think could use some management training, there's no harm in mentioning that there are options out there. Or if you're an organization or in some sort of leadership position, there are options out there. So please contact Beth. She is an amazing, amazing coach, and she will help get your organization to where it needs to be. As always, Beth, I would like to invite you back to chat with me some more on all these hot topics. You always provide such great insight, and it's very appreciated.
Stephanie, I can't thank you enough. I enjoy our conversations so much. And today's was particularly fun just to see how similar our lists of those 5 skills really were and what's so important to people. So thank you also for the shameless plug for running dialogue.
If you're interested in becoming a guest on my show, all the information on how to contact me is available in the show notes. Also, if you're enjoying the content and would like a shout out in an upcoming episode, a link in how you can support this podcast is available in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.